We're going to talk about the gap. We talked about a little bit of this in the morning. So, but we're going to dive deeper into some of the modalities of why the gap exists. So, first of all, I'm Asim Parikh. I'm with ONF and responsible for solutions and partnerships. You can all hear me fine? Okay, good. So we talked about this $1 billion+ puzzle. Guru talked about it this morning and showed this picture and asked this very pertinent question that even though there's a lot of opportunity, it looks like operators like AT&T, NTT, Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, others have talked about their willingness, their wanting to adopt these technologies. No one else has jumped in from the ecosystem perspective, right? So no one in the sense of supporting it, productizing it, and so on and so forth. So the question is why? So let's, as a group, we are the ecosystem group. This is an audience participation session. We want to understand why, right? And I'll tell you some of the examples and some of the kind of comparisons to other technologies which have developed. And then we should discuss and like we did the earlier questions, I appreciate people who are, who can bring questions up and then have different constituents answer it. So first of all, just to get a sense of, I see a few operators in the room. How many telecom equipment manufacturers, TEMs, are in the room? Any traditional TEMs? A couple of them? 3. How many VCs/entrepreneurs are in the room who are thinking of starting something around technology? Okay, maybe developers who are budding entrepreneurs who have not woken up yet. Okay, a few more. All right, and then the third category is more system integration or so on. So there are a couple of them here in the room as well. All right, so good. I think this is our 4 panelists, okay, at the highest level. We're going to have these 4 panels go and ask questions to each other and answer questions which I ask you. So this is how we're going to do it. We'll, again, quickly go through what our planned path to production was, how we were thinking as ONF, how the responsibilities would be divided between ONF and the community and the supply chain at the back end, see where we are today, and then really look at that gap where we would like to be, but we are not. And then the last point, which is the most important point, is the ecosystem perspectives of how what we are hearing back from the community, from the ecosystem, and how you think we should react. All right. So we've seen the picture above. Guru showed it, Timon showed it. I'm not going to describe the picture on the top, but what you're not seeing is what the expectation was. So if you see expectation-wise, everything which is in blue on the left, does the right-hand side also look blue? It looks different, right? It's a little odd, but it's supposed to be all red. On the left of solutions, open source, ONF, community, building it, okay? As you start going into solutions and start getting into trials and deployments, obviously, the maturity of the platform is going from alpha quality to beta and hardened, operationalized, large field trial quality, and then obviously supported commercial software. And so that's one axis. The middle things talks about how we are expecting the platform to mature from the software perspective and the solution perspective. And then at the bottom, we are showing in 2018, early 2018, when the board talked about this strategic plan, this was the expected focus and responsibility we were thinking the community would sign up for. The first part, getting reference designs done, open source components done, exemplar platforms done, and a little bit of solution building done to kind of assemble those things like Timon was talking about, those Lego blocks. We would get it done, get them to limited trials, a few 100 customers, exactly what AT&T announced this morning. And at that point, we would say, from the perspective of ONF, our job is done. We now just need to sustain and get new upstreamed inputs into the bugs, fixes, new architectures, new ideas. But really, What takes it forward into production is supply chain and operators working together much more closely. ONF is kind of tertiary or outside that equation, right? So this is what we expected when we started. Where are we today? So as you have heard multiple times today, we have had multiple POCs. About 25 operators have Cord or some variant of Cord in their labs. Some of them have taken it to trials. Some of them have taken it into limited production, right? And so there is a lot of success around what we have done, and integration with other projects like Onap, like Acreno. All of that is happening in this space. And this is an example of that. ONOS Trellis, the NFV fabric, is limited production in Comcast. I hope I'm not announcing anything. If I am, sorry. SIBA is on a path to field trials. In fact, AT&T, Andre announced that it's already in field trials with a few hundred customers in a multi-tenant unit environment. Production deployments, we expect to commence in 2019 between AT&T, DT, and TT, or some combination of thereof. And maybe the other two projects, the two other RDs, UPenn and ODTN, are a few months behind that, okay? So from face value, a lot of progress towards what our strategic plan was. So it is kind of starting to work out. So this shows the same thing in pictures, superimposed with the same picture we have on the top. I've taken the RDs out because the RDs are here. Open source components were built, exemplar platforms done, solutions in alpha limited trial kind of maturity level. And if you see the exemplars and trailblazing activities, I've shown you roughly the maturity of those platforms or those exemplars. NFV fabric is maybe the farthest along, SIBA closed next, and then as you go down, different levels of maturity. On the right are operators who have publicly talked about taking this to production, right? And that's where the gap is. So this is the gap. What happens now? Who takes the onus of hardening, operationalizing, supporting large field trials into tens of thousands, millions of customers, and then supporting them going forward? And this is that billion-dollar puzzle we are trying to solve as a group. Question?
Yeah, so last year I was at Card Build, and I don't think the terms SIBA, UPenn, or ODTN were even a thing. Okay, so from the perspective of somebody looking at how can I architect a solution here, there are new things that have come in the past year. They're each very, very complex things. Okay, SIBA might be a repackaging of our card, but there's a whole load of complexity here, and I think it's a lot for people to get their head around, and they're doing that. They're not out there trying to choose what open source platform or architecture am I going to base this on. What they're trying to do is persuade people above them that, yeah, we have to take apart our current business model and we have to think about doing things differently. And, at the same time, there's a load of vendors knocking at the door, talking about SD-WAN and, various other technologies that they're going to sort you out with. There's a lot here, and that's why I think the gap is much bigger than we actually expect it to be. Once we have a feasible solution, that's really the start of the journey, not the finish.
True. No, I think lot of wisdom in what you're saying. The pace of change is growing as exponentially as data is growing on our networks. All right. So ONF has been at the center of that change. But what happened earlier this year or late 2017 is the vendor community came and asked the similar question to the operator community, saying we cannot keep on building one-off solutions for each one of you, and each one of you comes with a requirements or a RFQ or RFP, which is slightly different, has a different set of combination of architectural pieces and or a selection of modules to integrate. So can you guys please get together? So up till then, it was kind of more chaotic and more organic change on every front in every different dimension, right? And that was the reason where the ONF board and the TLT, which was formed later, decided that we are going to only focus on a few things. And we are going to start with things which we know are going to be closest to production out in the future when it's starting this year. So hopefully the RD process, which is still new, it's still about only 9 months in, is starting to steer that wide, complex kind of different things which people should do from the ecosystem perspective and all of that into channelized. If you are a wireline expert supplier, now there are really only 1 or 2 things you should be really looking at from the ONF perspective to go and productize. You're not trying to boil the ocean and figure out everything, right? And the operators have said very clearly, this is our open architecture, as Hank was talking about earlier. These are the modules which need to have this kind of open interfaces around them. And so AT&T might decide, I don't want this particular module, but I want to replace it with something similar with the same open APIs, and hence it is much easier to integrate and much easier to not have a vendor lock-in, because now you can choose other modules if that module doesn't work out or the vendor, for whatever reason, is not optimally performing, right? So but I think that is a learning which we are institutionalizing in the community as a whole, but it's still not exactly where we want to be. The complexity is not simple. None of these things are a simple app which you develop over the weekend on your iPhone or your Android phone and put it out, right? And this is not, none of that is that trivial. We totally understand. But that is the reason we are bringing the community together into events like this and inviting everyone to participate in our exemplar platform, so that skill set can be built over weeks and months, rather than trying to do it on the day the RFP comes out. Because once the RFP comes out, frankly, it's a little too late if you have not been involved in the project already. You cannot understand a CEBA kind of architecture and start productizing that the day RFP comes out. It is too late. Okay. All right. So we went and kind of have defined the gap, but to try to solve that gap or trying to solve that puzzle, there are some examples of open source which we can look at. Now, none of these are exact matches to ONF world. So we are going to do some apples and oranges comparison, but at least it's good to know. So the first obvious one is Linux. Linux, for most of us who have followed open source or computing in general, know it started many, many, many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, as a project out of Bell Labs. It almost took 30 years and $1 billion+ of funding before the open source community consortium was formed as the OSDL in 2000. This was the first time the community kind of got together and said, really, this is worth doing as an open source supported organization, supported software. And obviously that merged with the Free Standards Group to create what we know of as Linux Foundation today. Okay, so see the timeline, 1969 to 2000, before it becomes an open source community project. Then now it is what it is, and Red Hat gets acquired by IBM for multi-billion dollars. Okay. Closer to our timelines, 2003 is when Kubernetes started in its original form at Google. vServers, 99 to 2010, Google kept on revising, perfecting this in their internal networks out of necessity. Again, Google, Amin talked about it in the morning. This is not because they wanted to, this is because they had to. There was no other available solution. And all the way in 2015 is really where this became an open source project and got the mass following as it enjoys today. So it is, again, a pretty learning experience. And last but not least, the most recent big open source project, Onap, again, started about 5-6 years ago. Is that right? 2013, roughly, in AT&T. Tens of thousands of man years or man months at least, I don't know about man years, but maybe hundreds of man years of effort before it was seeded from eComp into the Linux Foundation ONAP project. And in 2017 was the first release, right? So it took that effort. So what are the takeaways from this? And these are kind of important for us as an ecosystem to understand. It takes multiple years of incubation, even with large amount of large companies behind them, IBM behind Linux, AT&T behind ONAP, Google behind Kubernetes. And it is typically led by a very small team to start with, to get the architecture going. The product to going to production is variable times, at least 5 years, sometimes more. And only after it gets into production use, really, it starts maturing. You cannot get this mature before adoption. By definition, if you wait for adoption of an open source, it'll never mature. Right? You wait for maturity of an open source, it'll never mature. That's the point I'm trying to make. Right? So it is, you start to using it, you start seeing issues, you go back to the community, you start fixing bugs, and it gets mature. We talked about significant investment, and a core development team continues to work on it after it's mainstreamed, right? So it is still shepherded by the Linus Torvalds of the world to make sure that it's architecturally sound and continuing to grow. So let's come back to our problem, and this is where you come in. So how are we going to fill this gap? And we're going to look at the perspectives, which as ONF, because we have people from every of those 4 different categories I talked about earlier of the ecosystem, we're going to talk from each perspective and see whether all of us agree, and if we don't agree, let's add more bullets to it. If we agree, how do we get around that hump? Okay. So obviously, the current suppliers are the TEMs. There are a few incumbents, maybe half a dozen, who support maybe 80-90% of the operator's needs. And they have all signed up to one or the other projects. They were all ONF partners at one time. They have stepped down to become members, but they are very active in other open fora, including TIP, including Linux Foundation networking, and so on and so forth. So they all talk about willingness to open source. In the ONF context, they have also talked about willingness to do disaggregation, open source, and white box-based networking. But they continue to sell closed and proprietary solutions with some open source at the periphery, or even if it's in the core, it's well hidden from, there are no open APIs to get to that core. And this is what their observations have been, and why they think that they are not able to really make the leap. They are not maturing fast enough, so this is not a mature technology. And what our customers want is mature technology. Otherwise, we will be called every night because there will be an outage. So why should we change our ways? Is there any other reason, if you are a TEM, why you are not jumping in with both feet into this ocean? Am I missing anything? Have I not captured any other good reason? There is no money, which is the same thing as operators do not want to consume what I can give you because it's not mature, and hence there's no money. Is that the same, or there's different? Okay, we need a microphone.
I think we got a couple of things going on here. I don't know how many operators in the room, but what I'm about to say, if I offend you, please don't leave. But I'm an analyst, by the way. I'm with IDC. And one of the things, and I'm all about operations and the monetization functions, so that's the next step in getting things put together here. But one of the things that's really concerning to me is I hear operators talk a lot about, we want open source. We've heard that all day today. Yet they have to pay their bills. They have to collect revenue. They have to satisfy their customers' needs. So they need working solutions. They're willing to do this. They know this new thing of open source based everything is coming, but they still have to take care of business today. They still have to deliver, and they make money in doing that. That's the dilemma, and I'm not seeing that.
You're speaking the perspective of the operator or the TEM? I'm sorry, I'm not maybe getting it.
It's kind of like a catch-22. You can't have one without the other.
Sure.
The operator has to have the TEMs. The TEMs can't survive without the operators. So it's a vicious circle.
Fair.
All right.
Okay. So
and the TEMs can go a little bit into the open source because they know that's the eventual outcome, but the game still needs to be played.
Right. So I'm suggesting if we take operators at their face value of what they are saying publicly for the last few years, they want to change the game which they're in right now because of business reasons. They are not doing it because the game is no longer fun. They are not making enough money, and they need service velocity. They need to get new things into the network so that they can compete with the OTT players like the Azures and the and Netflixes of the world.
Or that they can have capabilities to create new forms of revenue.
Exactly.
So there's a ton of opportunities. We know that.
Fair, right. So that's exactly. But they want to be not labeled as the bit pipe vendor, the dumb pipe vendor anymore, and they want to go up the stack, which is a noble cause for them and their shareholders, obviously. But the TEMs are there. So if TEMs are hearing this, my point was, if TEMs are hearing this and they understand that they want to transition, they will not stop buying what they're buying, or they're not stopping to use the network they have today. But if they want to transition, there has to be a way for the TEMs to either allow for that change so that they can transition with them along with them, or they can say, no, we are going to not cannibalize our current business ever, and we are going to push back and just say, yes, we are doing it, but not really change. Those are the two questions. And from the TEM perspective, what are the reasons for not doing it besides non-cannibalization? That is obviously the right answer.
Okay, I understand.
Right. So, and my thing is, they are going to be unlikely to take the risk. If I was a TEM with 80% market share, there is no incentive for me to change, right? I can understand that. So there's another point.
I'm not clear on what you mean for the TEMs to change. I mean, if the equipment is getting replaced by open source, is the TEM supposed to become an open source developer? Or are we talking about not selling equipment?
So what we are talking about is taking open source architectures and open architectures and building products which are commercialized, hardened, and supported to make some of those maturity issues go away, is what the market is expecting them to do.
You mean like the disaggregated pieces of, we'll say, the ROADM or whatever like this?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Right. So whatever, if their virtualization, everyone has virtualized their hardware-based stuff into VNFs because the market forced them to do that maybe 2 years ago. But they are still monolithic VNFs. You get a router which is hardware, or you can get a VNF version of the same router which you can put on x86. But that is not what the operators are asking in these communities. They are talking about disaggregation, open source based, which are open architectures. So that's the ask. And that's what we mean by jumping in with 2 feet, is to build those things and support them and productize them and charge money. None of this is expected to be free, to the point this gentleman was asking. It is not about trying to give it away for free, right? It's just productizing it and getting value where you are adding value.
In most other industries, if somebody sees an opportunity here and the incumbents aren't changing, doesn't somebody usually jump in and take advantage? I think this is the real question. Why is nobody jumping in and doing this?
And we'll ask that question in the next slide. So this is the question to TEMS. So I think TEMS, from what our analysis says, they are unlikely to risk it unless they are forced to, and unless they are forced to means a competitive company comes up and says, no, don't worry about buying it from your current incumbent XYZ vendor. Here is an alternative which is at least 70-80% as robust and as featured. And it's good enough. It doesn't have to be perfectly matched, but it's good enough, right? So that's this perspective. Okay, so that's the challengers and system integrator perspective, right? So they see a big opportunity. But to do this right, and as Hank and others were saying before, it requires specialized networking skills in addition to software skills. So now we are adding software plus other things. So they seem to, at least my current understanding and our ONF's current understanding is that they have two issues. One is skill set. They are not deep experts in networking and access technologies and all of that. They are more software-centric people, more from the IT background. The second part is the lack of appetite to do $20 to $30 million of investment before the market starts paying them back for it. It's maybe more, 20 to 30, if, depending on how small a bite you take of that market, right? Okay, so they are asking the operators, the question is, they're putting kind of the ball in the operator's court saying, show us a clear path to revenue and big ROI, or 10, 20x ROI on our $20 million investment. Can we get $400 million or $200 million of business with some level of guarantee? And that's where the catch-22 is, I think. Any other system integrators have any other views on why there's a catch-22?
I think one of the other pieces is that what we're seeing from a system integrator perspective is the operators are out there deploying pieces of the architecture, not the full architecture. And so it doesn't make sense from a system integrator perspective to invest in the whole architecture until you see what pieces are going to be actually used by the various operators. I mean, you hear DTE and AT&T and NTT and others talk, and none of them say, yeah, we're using the whole, for example, CEBA architecture as it is. They're using pieces of it, and so to try and figure out which pieces each one wants to use and how to integrate those is I think, one of the big challenges.
Right behind you, yeah?
I think the other challenge also is the reputation of the operators. Just historically speaking, it's just well known that it's just hard to get revenue from operators, and they'll put you in the lab forever, and they'll skin you alive before giving you any hope of any revenue. So that's, I think, the other things that's holding back the challengers, so to speak, in the market. And that's where I think the TEMS kind of have an upper hand because they're already in there. They're the incumbents over there. So they feel like they have an upper hand and possibly can hold off the challengers for as long as they possibly can.
Fair. Anyone else? There's one gentleman in the front here. Thanks, Diamond.
Yeah, thanks. I get from an SI perspective, at least from my perspective, I think part of it is also there's a lot of talent in the community, but a lot of the potential SIs wouldn't have the necessary scale to just even get into the conversation with one of these operators as far as being able to provide a solution or whatnot. So, it's sort of tangential to the $20 to $30 million investment, but just from whether you have the appetite for it or not, just the actual scale and ability to provide that large scale solution. But, there's obviously a lot of talent at a smaller scale that I don't know and obviously we're early days, but I'm curious whether or not the community allows for that talent to kind of contribute beyond just from a code base, contribute to the ecosystem, I guess.
So the community allows even an individual contributor to contribute as much or as often as they want.
But as part of the ecosystem.
As part of the
it's like, well, how would a small SI contribute to the ecosystem outside of code share?
So there are two parts of it. The technical contribution is one part, the business contribution or the business towards the business goal is a different part. The business goal part, you are absolutely right. A small SI walking into an AT&T, or I'm just making AT&T or DT or one of the large tier ones, would not hold up in the scrutiny of their purchasing department saying, you are a 5 people or 25 people or 100 people team, and I can't risk my network on 100 people organization. That's a different problem. I don't have a good answer for that. At least I don't, right? Someone might. But from the technical contribution, obviously, we feel that the more you can actively contribute, and if you specifically take a small bite and say, this is the part I'm going to contribute, I'm going to become the expert in this, the chances of when someone is putting a larger SI, maybe a larger SI is putting things together, they would want to use someone like that organization to build it, is my expectation. And that's what I've seen happen before. Right? I've been a startup which was used by a larger system integrator to take on Verizon's whole content delivery network. And I was part of it, so I know exactly how it works.
Right.
Yep. All right. How are we doing on time, Simon? We are running over? Okay, I'm going to wrap up. So I think there is this old no risk, no gain kind of thing here. If you wait for everything to be perfect, as I said, the RFP to be out with $1 million sign behind it, it might be a little too late to be actively pursuing that RFP. So there is a little bit of risk, which I would expect this category of ecosystem has to be willing to take. All right. We don't have any of these, so I'm going to make this very simple. I think this is to the point where someone was mentioning that the VCs, the gentleman there, that VCs and entrepreneurs don't really want to go into a service provider market because it's a freaking hard thing to sell them anything. It takes 24 months or more, and they put you in the lab forever. And and I've been there in that exact location, so I can sympathize with it. I think this is for really the onus goes to the operators to convince the VCs and the entrepreneurs that the game is changing. They are not going to wait for 18 months or 6 years to upgrade their hardware going forward. And there is a big opportunity. And I think entrepreneurs and VCs should take a closer look at what these people are saying in these fora, and maybe change their ways, right? But given that we don't have any of these people, at least no one raised their hand, so I'm going to skip this. All right, the operators obviously are the top of the food chain in this particular context. They obviously have to make revenue from us as consumers and other enterprises, but from the perspective of infrastructure, they are the top of the food chain. I think they're doing a lot of voicing, supporting organizations like ONF, like other open systems. They have allocated a lot of brain trust from their side. The AT&T Foundry, the Deutsche Telekom Access 4.0 team are good examples of 30, 40, 50 hardcore engineers, developers, testers being devoted from them. And they're going to do trials. So I think what they are observing is anything more, if the supply chain wants to expect a PO before they get their feet wet, it is maybe unreasonable. Okay? So I think I think I don't see any operators. I think all operators went to other fora. Maybe there are a few at the back. But what we are seeing and what the board is thinking is that some few forward-thinking operators may need to go the extra mile and really provide an RFP or some kind of visible, quantifiable indication to the industry, which says, here we are priming the pump, let's get this started. We want to deliver it. This is what we are willing to, we are going to pay real money for this. It's millions of dollars, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they'll invest their resources and their technologies alongside the supply chain to make this happen. And, you know, some of you have already worked with operators like this in this capacity, so you know that this is the model they're following. And I think this is maybe the only way. So I think we have a great opportunity for people who want to challenge the status quo and change how we have been doing things for the last 40 years, for the next 40 years, right? So, and we have got the right people together here, and 400 of them who think this is important. We have spent 3 days doing this. So, in theory, who can solve the puzzle? Only we can, right? And we have to do this. So let's go and get on with it. Thank you. All right.